people have been like bombarding my comment section, telling me to talk about like the Ethan Klein drama. Now, of course, if you go on social media in leftist spaces, it's all like spilling over. But honestly, when someone like sent me the links to like these videos that are like 2 and 3 hours long, I decided I'm not gonna necessarily talk about everything because there's so much stuff to do with like Hasan and different Twitch streamers being banned and stuff Ethan Klein has said. I do want to address it a little bit, but there is something else I want to talk about in this video, and it will probably be the focus. It's basically one of the Twitch streamers that has been banned from Twitch for, I think, both anti-Semitism, allegedly, and also apparently got banned because they said US soldiers like maybe deserve to get PTSD, walked it back, clarified it, and then apparently still got into trouble with Twitch. And I posted a tweet, you can see it on screen here. I don't know why my tweets are going viral recently, just dumb tweets. I said, is saying US soldiers are bad now controversial or something? The level of hate she was receiving for saying this was just like absolutely insane. And I've actually been arguing with people, great use of time, arguing with people on Twitter, but allegedly leftists on Twitter who are veterans telling me why I'm so wrong to demonize veterans, including veterans who fought in imperialist wars for like America and the UK, right? And I want to talk about that because I thought it was an interesting topic, and I've actually argued with people before, and I find it very bizarre. It seems to be like a US leftist thing where they think because a lot of the military, although I wouldn't even say it's a majority, but, you know, a fair chunk of the military are from poverty, they act like you can't actually criticize anyone for joining the military, and it's one of the worst militaries in the world in terms of the stuff it's done since the post-war period, and also a military that is helping Israel right now. You're not actually allowed to say anything bad about people who choose to join that organization, because part of the reason they might choose to do it is because they want free college. And I think that fundamentally exposes how poorly a lot of US leftists actually view globalized capitalism, in that they think because they are like near the bottom of the system in their own country, which is one of the, you know, most powerful and rich countries on earth, that means like their decisions are like really not their own at all. And it's actually okay for them to go sign up to this war machine and go destroy the lives of far poorer people in other countries, right? Just so they can get free college. So I want to talk about that today because it's something that's been irritating me, especially when you get all the hero worship in America. But I am going to talk a lot about Ethan Klein spiraling and basically going on a crusade against alleged leftist anti-Semitism, which seems like, you know, a bizarre thing to do when Elon Musk's Twitter exists, where I see right-wing anti-Semitism like without even looking for it every single day on Twitter. And also the guy who owns Twitter is also an anti-Semite, and the only reason that ADL have said he's all right is because he's pro-Israel. And that seems to be a bigger problem at the moment. And if you're seeing all this stuff in Gaza right now, and you think now is the time to be like, oh, actually, all the pro-Palestinian people are actually massive anti-Semites, when still, although I've called this out on the left myself, I've made a whole video about people retweeting these like far-right accounts over Palestine, I'm really not actually seeing anti-Semitism in left-wing spaces. I'm mainly seeing right-wing people using the Palestine issue to push anti-Semitism a lot on Twitter, and I'm just seeing like the usual anti-Semitism from the right wing, but also I'm seeing a lot of anti-Semites who are supporting Israel. You see that a lot in Europe with traditional far-right parties who don't like Jewish people, but they support Israel because they actually hate Muslims more than they don't like Jewish people. So Israel, to them, they like it because it brutalizes Muslims in Palestine. So all of that coming up for you today, but also check out my fundraiser. We're over £7,000 now for medical aid to Palestinians, which also includes working in Lebanon as well. I really want to get this to 10,000 before we close it. So if you haven't heard about this yet, or if you haven't checked it out, please check out my fundraiser. So like I said, I haven't been following the new Ethan Klein drama. Obviously, I know he's going to war with Twitch and Hasan's community for being like anti-Semitic, right? And this is like a week ago, and I responded to this because this is the thing about this whole drama I'm not really understanding, right? So Ethan Klein is a guy with loads of skeletons in his closet. Like, it just said loads of terrible shit on every platform he's been on for a long, long time, right? So he has said he has to call out Hasan for this stuff. And I think a lot of his grievance with apparently the anti-Semitic left is they keep calling him a Zionist. And I'll play you a clip from a video I made a while ago. He basically thinks anyone who calls him a Zionist just wants to call him like a slur for Jew. So he wrote this on Instagram like a week ago, saying, I know you guys don't like me talking about Hasan, and I appreciate there's a lot of crossover with the audiences. It's impossible to ignore that the majority of these people are coming from his community. I think they were calling him a Zionist. It's something that he and his audience refuse to reckon with. Hasan's whitewashing of that Houthi kid was disgusting. I don't give a fuck that he's seen an episode of One Piece. I'd like to know why he's hanging out with a boat captain of a Chinese cargo vessels, a hostage. And as more info has come out about the kid being terrorist affiliated and being anti-Semitic, Hasan has refused to disavow him. The opposite, actually, he continues to prop him up. And remember the context for him bringing this up. This is during some of the worst atrocities we've seen in Gaza right now. Like, very, very terrible footage. It's now the time he starts just banging on about this Houthi kid. This happened months and months ago, right? And also, like, I thought this guy was a Houthi. Apparently he isn't even in the Yemen military either. That's just what people said. But anyway, none of that matters. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, this guy that was interviewed by Hasan was actually in the Yemen military and was raiding just random boats, passing through like Yemen waters. So I just write, getting mad about a teenage Houthi from one of the poorest countries on earth that just suffered from the devastating Saudi war in Yemen when your wife was in the IDF and you willingly became an Israeli citizen is really funny. Yeah, so like that's the thing for me, right? You willingly became an Israeli citizen. You saw what Israel was like and you're like, yeah, I want some of that for myself. I want to join. How do I join? And then your actual wife was in the Israeli military. I don't think you have any high ground to start criticizing other factions in the region, especially if this, guy, let's say, was a fighter, a 19-year-old kid who literally grew up during like a devastating famine enacted on him by the Saudi regime with the backing of the US and Israel, right? I don't really think that's comparable with a white American guy seeing Israel and being like, yeah, give me. Like, I want to go live in an apartheid colony in the Middle East because it looks dope. Again, I don't understand the moral high ground here. Of course, this comes at a time where, like, the IDF are literally the most terrible military in the entire world, all the crimes they're doing. And we're really getting butthurt about, like, the Houthis in Yemen. I haven't seen the same anger directed at the IDF. Now, I think this is all in response to people calling him Zionist. So he shows some screenshots, I think from someone's subreddit. I thought Ethan said he wasn't a Zionist. Fuck Zionism, fuck Zionist. He is. And he writes, you need to ask yourself, what is a Zionist? Is it just someone who believes Israel shouldn't be wiped off the map? A lot of people would say yes. That's why the term is dumb and basically a slur at this point. It can be deployed against anyone. People are calling AOC and Bernie Sanders Zionists. So again, this is something he's been butthurt about for a while. I'll play you a clip. He was getting really mad that people kept calling him this, kept calling him a Zionist. Here he understands the term a bit more, but he doesn't seem to understand that it doesn't mean like you support Netanyahu, support everything Israel's doing right now, support everything that's going on right now. It doesn't actually mean that, but he seems to think that's kind of like the context of what it means. So if you keep calling him it, even though he doesn't explicitly support those things, that means you're actually anti-Semitic.
Waiting for any reason to call me, and by the way, call me a Zionist, call me racist. Why? Because I made one stupid, insensitive joke. If you're coming at me with those kinds of takes, you are ensuring peace will never happen. Because you can't even have a fucking You can't even have any kind of dialogue where everybody isn't walking totally aligned with you to explain your reason for calling me a racist Zionist, which, by the way, Zionist is just another slur for Jew, being a Jew. You know how many people now calling fucking every Jew a Zionist? It's like, okay, just call me a Jew and get it fucking over with. Call me the K word. At least I'll know what you mean. It's just the truth. Not everybody, not all the time. And I'm doing, as an Israeli dual citizen, as someone who's deeply invested in the state of Israel, who's probably more sympathetic to the Israeli perspective than most people would be. I've tried so hard to pull myself to some kind of central ground where we can have a real conversation about this stuff. I'm pulled myself all the way to, outright saying that the Israeli government is committing. And so, but you still want to call me a racist and a genocide and a Zionist. Why would you call me a Zionist if it wasn't just, oh, you're a fucking Jew? When I have said all the things that you want to hear from me, I'm on your side as much as I possibly can be. And instead of, holding hands and having a real conversation, you spit in my fucking face and you call me a Zionist. Mm-hmm. If you call me a Zionist, you're anti-Semite. You know why? Because I'm not a Zionist, and I've made that exactly profoundly, deeply clear. So when you see someone on Twitter, when you see someone in the audience calling me a Zionist, what they're calling me is a Jew. Mm-hmm. Because that's the only goddamn thing that means at that point.
So yeah, pretty insane statements there. And this guy keeps conflating people's criticism of him with apparent anti-Semitism and stuff. And yeah, Bernie Sanders is a Zionist. I don't know. That's not controversial. When he was in college, he literally went to an Israeli settlement to do a summer camp thing, right? He supports Israel's right to exist. Israel, which is built on top of another country, right? Ethan Klein, you went and became a citizen. So, yeah, you support Israel's right to exist. You support, the borders that they currently are. Where is your criticism of the current Israeli, landmass? I haven't heard you say, let's go back to the 1948 border. Have you said that? No. So, but even if you did say that, you're still supporting Israel's right to exist on top of another territory, therefore making you a believer of Zionism. It's different saying, as much as I don't think this should exist, I can't ignore that Israel's a powerful country and will probably exist going forward, and we just have to accept that as a reality, which I think most people can acknowledge at this time. While you'd want a one state solution, secular state, pretty clear Israel aren't going to give up that power anytime soon, so you're probably going to have to deal with that reality. Yeah, that's one thing, but saying that you think Israel should exist, you willingly became a citizen, you've never talked about them giving land back in terms of going back to a smaller territory that they used to have when they were initially founded in the 1940s. No, you're just, someone who believes in it. So therefore that makes you a Zionist, and if people call you that, especially with what you're doing right now, it's pretty clear that you have an issue with Arabs and Muslims, right? So you're not really doing the Zionist movement any favors. I really don't understand, if you really care about what's happening with anti-Semitism right now, why you are targeting Muslim leftists and thinking that is the main source of anti-Semitism online, not all, the absolute fucking cesspool that is Twitter. I know he's acknowledged some of this stuff, but not to the degree it is. And Israel is literally a lightning rod for increasing anti-Semitism, and this includes mainly on the right wing as well. Go on Elon Musk's Twitter and see who is actually making anti-Semitic criticisms of Israel. It usually isn't left-wing people. And even he says here in another story that this guy called Hutch, who probably shares the same position as Ethan Klein, you only have to look at his tweets from the start of what was happening in Gaza, or a month in. And he writes, the H3 Hasan drama is so nuts because to my knowledge, Ethan has already conceded so much. Palestinians deserve a state. Israel's gone too far. Netanyahu's evil. And all he asks them to do is stop cheering on terror groups and calling his wife a murderer. Pretty much. I mean, that is all true to a certain extent. I think that's a pretty charitable picture that's been painted. I wouldn't say that's all he's done. Let's not forget, this guy was cracking jokes about Aaron Bushnell straight away. He did it in a private stream and then started doing it more on a public stream. A lot of that is pretty insanely gross and doesn't strike me as someone who isn't a Zionist, making those sorts of jokes. So if we go on a little bit, he keeps talking about this streamer called Frogan, and he says he was doing this to show everyone that the harassment she was getting wasn't from him or wasn't directed from his community. It's actually because she said that US soldiers deserve to have PTSD. And he said he was only sharing these tweets on his Instagram to prove this point. I mean, I don't know if I really believe him, but here he is sharing a drama alert thing of Frogan talking about this. And this is what the rest of the video is going to be about, is people are like celebrating Frogan's ban. It's pretty clear this campaign against Frogan is just like pure racism in terms of this take specifically, because if I said all US soldiers deserve PTSD, do you think anyone would give a fuck? Do you honestly think I'd get banned from anything? Do you honestly think like anyone would even fucking register I'd said that? If I said that on a stream tomorrow, sincerely, even if someone clipped it and posted it on Twitter, I literally don't think anyone would give a shit. So you had like drama alert and loads of right-wingers sharing this, but let's actually get into what she said before we get into some of the reaction, which is like, of course, unhinged. And then I just want to talk about this because although loads of right-wingers are pushing this, like she deserves to be banned for saying bad stuff about US soldiers, there's been leftists arguing with me today, like similar sentiment of like US soldiers are victims too, which I just really don't agree with in most circumstances. But let's listen to what she had to say.
I have no pity at all for any fucking soldiers. Distress, thank you so much. I will never have any fucking pity for any fucking soldiers. U.S. military? Boo who? I hope you get PTSD. I do, the ones I'm like whatever about the U.S. soldiers are the ones that like acknowledge that like what they did was wrong. They didn't know back then. Whatever. You're a good person in my book. I'm like a Tom, thank you so much for the 10 gifted. The U.S. military that are like, yeah, like, I did this back then, but now I know it's wrong. Like, I'm changed. Like, you don't deserve the PTSD. But, like, any other motherfucker, you're like, oh, my God, I want my fucking Camaro, no student loans. Fuck you. I hope you get PTSD. And I hope you get no health insurance when you get back to America.
So, I don't know about you, but, like, that seems like the coldest take ever. Yeah, if you join the military and don't acknowledge what you did was bad when you're in the military, that she wants you to have PTSD, right? I wouldn't like personally say that myself. I actually have a friend who was in the military and does have PTSD. So like, it's bad. I don't wish that on anyone. But also you can see she's probably talking about people like Ron Kovic, famous, obviously anti-war protester who served in Vietnam, came from this like all-American background. Obviously every American high schooler has probably read this book. Very good book, decent film as well, directed by Oliver Stone. And someone who dedicated their life to making sure people wouldn't end up like them would be like brainwashed into going along with this empire and destroying other countries for basically profit and empire, and then coming home broken and being disposed of by the system itself. Like Ron Kovic outlines that very nicely in his book. But can I just remind people, conservatives are really mad about this. Conservatives who say the most terrible shit about Palestinians, Muslims, conservatives who say the most terrible shit about the LGBT community. Drama Alert supports Donald Trump. Keemstar supports Donald Trump. And it's like, you're really getting precious about someone who said, yeah, if US soldiers serve overseas and don't repent, I hope they have like trauma from it, like psychological trauma from it. You're getting precious about that when you said all this terrible shit. And if we go into the reaction, like Nick Merckx is one of these people. It's like, oh, this pisses me off. There's still so many of us in the streaming world that appreciate our veterans and those that serve this country. Thank you for our freedoms. We're grateful for our privilege. Saying something as gross as this while stuffing her face, enjoy the freedom to be able to say shit like this in a country she hates so much. It's like being ripped off. Ripped out of a cartoon. It's almost too corny to believe it's real. Conservatives love to talk about NPCs so much. How are you still doing the same military worship that's been going on for like decades and decades? Like being absolutely cut to the military. Americans just like blow my mind. But anyway, She got loads of hate for this, which I feel like was manufactured. Like, even if you love the military, I've seen lots of veterans saying, like, they don't give a shit she said this. She clarified, and she said, the US military has conducted some of the most horrific crimes against humanity in the modern era. In Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Lebanon, and Palestine, my anger is directed at individuals who are currently championing these crimes as if they liberated my people. It's horrific and disgusting. The beginning of the clip was worded poorly, and I do apologise for that. I go on to clarify in the clip that I do not mean all of the military, but specifically those with no remorse. What I said was out of frustration, as they are currently bombing my family in the name of liberation. I realise that wishing people harm isn't the best way to talk about these issues, and I could have talked about these topics in a more sensitive way. So what she said initially, I don't actually give a single shit about. Her clarification, absolutely fine. The clarification she made in the actual clip, absolutely fine. Like, I don't understand why people are so outraged about this, even if they disagree with it. I don't really care. Like, what she said wasn't completely outrageous. If you're serving, like, one of the worst militaries of all time, as we're going to get into, a lot of people like to hide behind class analysis, acting like every single person who joins the military is actually, like, a victim. I wouldn't say that myself. And, I was tweeting today some stuff about this just to kind of like make the point clearer for people, right? Because I don't personally like using fictional examples about the real world, right? I don't personally like maybe comparing like the real world to Harry Potter or Star Wars. Like, sometimes you just have to make your point, right? So I write, oh, you think it's okay to wish PTSD on the brave soldiers of House Harkonnen? They didn't want to kill the Fremen on Arrakis. They actually just joined the army for free healthcare and spice. You do the same if you were born in Gady Prime. Don't blame individual Harkonnen soldiers for their house's atrocities. The fault solely lies with the Nabaran Fade Rother. They're just following his orders. And then just one more for you. Edgelord leftists want to tell you this Imperial Death Trooper is a bad guy. He's from a poor family in the Outer Rim and joined to get a college education on Coruscant. You want him to be a poor moisture farmer. He voted for Chancellor Valorum, by the way, and is no Palpatine fan. So I wrote all these tweets after actually arguing with other leftists about US veterans and how US veterans like aren't actually victims when you contextualize their actions in terms of like the role of the US military like globally, right? All the terrible stuff they've done in the Middle East, previously Southeast Asia, how they prop up like a terrible status quo, work with the Saudis to do what they did in Yemen, arm the Saudis in Yemen. Obviously, US troops are actually working in Israel right now, helping them out with what they're doing in Gaza. So if you are a US citizen signing up to the military, you are okay with doing those things as long as it benefits you personally. And before we get into my arguments with people on the left about this, so I wrote my dissertation for my history degree on Jimmy Carter's foreign policy, right? And what was happening, it happened with Nixon and Ford, but it was happening with Carter as well. They were changing the US military. So the US military obviously had the draft in Vietnam, that started getting phased out, and they wanted to make it like a professional military. So people who would join the military would really want to join for other reasons than like going overseas and fighting brutal wars. They'd see it as like a career path to get material benefits. And they started relaxing a lot of things to do like uniform, just make it a more like appealing place to go instead of like, and try and reform this image of what it had in Vietnam. Now, also having said that, I also recognize that the US system is actually designed to funnel people into the military. Now, what we're doing here is we're explaining why people join the military. And this seems to be a lot of people an excuse for joining the military. So I totally recognize that the US system fundamentally doesn't have a lot of social safety nets. So the US Army, or just the armed forces in general, seem more appealing because you can get benefits that you wouldn't traditionally get if you were a regular citizen. Healthcare, can get college, can get like different skills that the army will pay for you. Maybe, you know, you're struggling with accommodation or you didn't do great in school. There's not many options, so you join the US military and maybe you don't think about its role in the world. Maybe you don't give a shit about its role in the world. You're poor, you're desperate, you're going to join the military. And because of the US system, what it is, you know, this absolutely huge colony that was built on slave labor. And it's, of course, a white supremacist structure. A lot of the poorest people in US society are actually people who are non-white. Like African Americans especially have disproportionately been represented in the military and US wars overseas because of the poverty being exacerbated in this group from things like racism. So you get a lot of African Americans who would join the military. Is also one of the first desegregated, government jobs you could get. I think it was like 1948 they desegregated the military. So all of these things made the military more appealing. And like in a vacuum, we understand that, right? And I don't think anyone is going to argue that it doesn't make sense that certain people join the military. But even to what Frogan was saying in her clip, she's saying, I'm saying this about people who don't have any remorse for what they do. Because fundamentally, you are making a choice at the end of the day to serve in the worst imperialist military in the world that props up the other ones that are, at the moment are worse, like the Israeli military. If you want to frame these people as victims, like, it just becomes so insane in my mind. Like, let's take this to British servicemen in Northern Ireland in the 60s and 70s, right? And you can make the same argument. A lot of people who join the military in the lower ranks in the UK are usually from poorer backgrounds and stuff. And you're really going to tell me British soldiers occupying Ireland and facing violence for doing so are victims of the system? Again, we can acknowledge the role poverty plays in pushing people into the military without acting like both the military is primarily made up of exclusively desperately poor people, and also first world poverty gives you no choice, that you just must join the military or you can't do anything else, right? So on my post about this, some left-wing people were arguing with me. So I want to show you their perspective. The veteran I was arguing with said, 1,000 reasons people join the military, often as one of the few outlets for upward mobility, education and stability. You can criticize the military complex we have and decisions that are made while recognizing that. And I say, you're choosing to serve a military that subjugates many nations in the world for US capital, justifying serving in Iraq or Afghan with I wanted upward mobility isn't really comforting to the victims of US wars, is it? That is certainly part of the reason why the US military is a successful professional military, and that should be explained. But it doesn't serve as complete absolution for joining up in the first place. You could make the exact same arguments of becoming a cop. He says, no, you really can't. What you're saying is fundamentally not understanding how basic socioeconomics and access works for the vast majority of people who join. You're mad that an 18-year-old with limited options and understanding isn't thinking about world politics. I say, I'm not mad, but if they get ordered to invade another country and do it to get healthcare, that isn't an excuse. Again, it's an explanation of how the US military exploits poverty for manpower, which doesn't absolve its members or make them victims, globally speaking. Him saying, it's weird how you understand how exploitation works, but for some reason think that exploited people should have full awareness of how global socioeconomics work. It's a very lazy way to think and approach the subject. And we basically just kept going back and forth on this point. But what makes this so fascinating to me is that these people arguing with me at this point don't realize you can use this to justify basically anyone joining any military, right? If you say a civilian becomes a soldier mainly for material gain, and their society might not provide them with loans for college or healthcare and stuff like that, so this poverty makes them join. So they're victims too, because the system never provided them with the basics. So they had to join the military, go overseas, and just ruin the lives of millions of people, thousands of people who live in far poorer countries. But then we can take this to, let's say, Vietnam under the French colonization. Plenty of Vietnamese joined up with the French and subjugated their own people for the benefit of the French Empire. And then you could say, well, those Vietnamese, they were poor, they didn't have healthcare, didn't have a good schooling or anything, so what do you expect them to do? You expect them to realise that it's bad to serve the French Empire? How could you expect that? While at the same time, some of the poorest Vietnamese in society were fighting the revolution against the Vietnamese collaborators and the French Empire, right? So people do know better. And I don't like this mindset of everyone who joins the military who's poor is a dummy who doesn't know what they're getting into. Like, I understand, right? I understand why people join. I understand why they might be ignorant of what the US does. But at the same time, you're joining a military, and if you're joining like one of the like actual groups that might go into another country to invade it, you're making the decision that if I have to, I will kill and I will fight for this country and I will do whatever they tell me so they give me healthcare. That is you making fundamentally a selfish decision. And whether if you realize the wider context of this could negatively affect people far worse off than me is just something you might learn when you get older. And like Frogan was saying, you might learn that, come out of the military, and then start being really anti-war like Ron Kovic was. But that is why I use the sci-fi examples, because when you put it in the sci-fi context of like an Imperial Death Trooper, right? These like elite stormtroopers. And you start saying, well, he didn't know it was bad because he grew up like a poor farmer in the Outer Rim. Growing up in poverty is not an absolution for becoming a soldier. And I just think this is a very dangerous mindset, because as much as we like to analyze systems and everything on the left and realize how poverty drives people into these terrible militaries, you can't just act like humans are completely immoral robots, that there isn't anything going on in their head when they make that choice, that they don't know that there might be something a little bit controversial about joining the military or what the military actually acts as. Like, no one can join the military, especially in a country like the US, and divorce that from what the US has done over at least the last 20 years, if not the last 70 years, and think that maybe I would be forced to do that too. Like, are you seriously telling me people who are about my age, like 28, when they joined the military, they weren't thinking about I could be potentially sent to Iraq or Afghanistan, and in fact, many of them were sent to Iraq and Afghanistan, and you're saying that when they made that choice, because they were poor, they're actually the victims too. And when they go over to Afghanistan to occupy another country and maybe do terrible things to the civilians there to keep them even poorer, they're the victims. Again, your mindset has to go into a more global nature of the US role in the world, where the US extracts resources from the global south and keeps countries poor for US capital, and the US military serves as an arm of that. You jumping into that military to get benefits that your other citizens don't enjoy as well, like, yeah, it's not an absolution. I understand why it happens. I understand how the system is designed a certain way so it can funnel people into the military, but let's not pretend there isn't a choice, or most poor people would join the military, or most people who are in the military would come from abject poverty. And that's just not the case statistically, that the people who join the military overall come from abject poverty. So do I wish all US servicemen who don't come out and become anti-war protesters like Ron Kovic, do I wish PTSD on all of them? No, I don't. For numerous reasons, like knowing people who've like been like that myself, and I just don't want people to have terrible mental health. It's also just not a good thing for a country to have loads of people with terrible, like severe mental health stuff that wouldn't get treated by the US government anyway, like going back to the Born on the 4th of July example. But at the same time, I've heard way worse stuff about the US military. It didn't seem like the hottest take ever, and leftists getting mad at this as well and joining in the dog pile with the right wing is just really, really funny to me. And again, serving House Harkonnen, serving the Empire, serving the IDF, serving the Saudi military, and serving a volunteer military like the US military, right? Just because you grew up poor or you want student loans, again, doesn't make you a victim. You're still making a choice, whether you understand it or not, that you're going to get material benefit from being part of an arm that keeps poorer people than you poor indefinitely, just so you can have some benefits through the system, which you could also get through other means that don't involve potentially invading other people's countries and subjugating them. So yeah, that's basically my take on all this stuff. I'm gonna have a longer video tomorrow about that, like celebrity chef cooking for the IDF. That will be like a more structured video. This was just a more like casual one, based on my interactions on Twitter, which is kind of annoying because I deleted Twitter off my phone like all last week, and one of my tweets about Belfast went like insanely viral. So I had to go on it today just to interact with that. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching.